I don't think he needs much introduction. He is a member of Branch 638. But I would like to introduce him as the newly appointed Minister of National Defense. Please welcome Vote of Honor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It really is a pleasure for me to be here tonight because this is my branch, and I look around the tables of friendly faces, and so I'm not really a stranger here. There was some miscommunication over the last few days. I was planning to come here, I guess, when John asked me to come and speak to you, and I put that in my book. But I have 3 offices, and they have to connect to each other and talk to each other. And I canceled an event on Friday because I had some kind of military thing to deal with. Just before, I'm going to talk about Afghanistan, but before I get into that, I was at the Battle of the Atlantic commemoration today, a very, very nice commemoration downtown. And as you know, because you had your ceremony for Victory in Europe, beautiful sunny day. And lots of old vets out there downtown, but especially they had all the young cadets. They had young naval cadets and Army Air Force cadets. And they did a march past, and I reviewed with a couple of old comrades from the Navy and from the Merchant Navy. And the last group through were a bunch of air cadets. And in the last file was this little kid. He couldn't have been taller than that. It was really something to see. I don't know if he was sort of 3'8" or wherever the heck it was, but he was the smallest cadet I've ever seen. But so we had sort of the 2 extremes. But it was a nice day for the Navy, and it's nice that they had that day to celebrate, just like the Air Force had their Battle of Britain. The Army, of course, because they were everywhere, have to celebrate November the 11th. As I said, I want to talk tonight, and I don't have a prepared speech. I just got some notes here to talk about Afghanistan, because it is a topic that is in the newspapers and people are discussing it all the time. And as you may recall, in early March, the Prime Minister and I made a visit over to Afghanistan. And it was, for both of us, it was the first time we'd ever been in Afghanistan, and it was the first time we visited the troops. And I don't know if any of you have been to Afghanistan, but when you fly in, it is a desert. It is a desert. It's like the Arctic without snow. And you wonder how people can even live there. But when you get down, what you find is the farmers, when they have their fields, they make these little embankments around their fields, and then they pour the water in, and with seeds, and things grow instantly. It's like they really grow quickly, trees and plants and everything else. So from an outsider's point of view, you think it's just a desert and nobody can live there, but with a bit of water, irrigation, they have plants and they grow pretty well. And so they have the potential to feed themselves on that land. The other thing is that as you fly over, they say there's 28 million people there. Now, Kabul, and I'll talk about that in a minute, Kabul's got about 5 million people. In Kandahar, where we are mainly located, is about 300,000 or 400,000. But that still leaves like 27 million or so. And you can fly over that land and you don't know where the 27 million are because you don't see anybody out on the roads, or so I don't know where they're hiding all the people. Somebody told me that in each of the houses they have large numbers, extended families. So maybe that's where it is. The houses it reminds you, if you picture the Bible or those old pictures, the old movies they had of Moses and that, the houses are made of clay bricks, mud, whatever, and every property has a wall around it. Instead of, where you have a picket fence or you have a fence in your backyard, they have these walls, I don't know, 6-7 feet walls made of this clay brick. And the house is in the corner, and it's a mud house too. And I asked why they had all these walls. Every house has walls. Well, it's in their religion, women cannot be seen by other men. So this is the only way women get any freedom, is walking around the backyard inside the walls. And you see that everywhere. You also see houses, an incredible number of houses broken and smashed. They fought 30 years in Afghanistan, civil war, war against the Russians, etc. And there's houses broken everywhere. So the country's not in great shape. When we landed in Kandahar to meet the troops, well, I got to tell you, the troops have got to be the best soldiers in the world. They are. I've never come across one of them, and we had a chance to talk to them privately, who had the least doubt of what they're doing and why they're there. They're really committed to it. And I think it really took the Prime Minister back when he realized, you know, how well our troops are doing there and how well they're trained. And as I said, I'm very proud of them. I'll talk about some of the other troops here in a minute. During that trip, we met President Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, quite a charming gentleman. But I was at this dinner with him and the Prime Minister, and he had his cabinet ministers there. And President Karzai would say something like, we're going to do this in the future, etc. And then his finance ministers are always bad. Finance minister would say, I don't know, Mr. President, if we can afford that or not. Sort of through the whole dinner, it was the finance minister always reminding the president that he didn't know if he could afford it or not. So
We know the feeling.
yes. So democracy is starting to burgeon there. They had national elections. They had elections in their 38 provinces. They've got governments in there now in the 38 provinces and at the capital in Kabul. And they had a large turnout of the population, so there's legitimacy to the government. Now, they've still got a long way to go. You can't turn a country like that into an Athenian democracy in a few years. So they are coming along. In their constitution, they've committed, they are an Islamic state, but they've also committed to sort of the basic understandings of the UN, freedom of religion and freedom of travel and all those other things. So they are coming along. Every once in a while they hit a bump in the road, but they are coming along. We also met on the way out Prime Minister Aziz in Pakistan, who was a really charming gentleman. In fact, he's so smooth, he could sell you cars, he could sell you anything. He was a really smooth talker. And I just want to sort of say two things about Pakistan. Their capital, it's like going to Disneyland. You can't believe it. I mean, the country has, more than 100 million people, and there's a lot of poverty there, but when you hit their capital, I don't know how many years ago, but recently it was rebuilt. They moved from in the south up to the north, and every building's brand new, and it looks like Disneyland castles. It's incredible. Everything's white and sparkling and huge and magnificent, and you would think you're in a different country. And the Israelis get to see there the life of the people on top and the people below. It's quite an extreme difference. The army runs the country there. They seem to have a lot of soldiers, because when we got out of the airport, all the way to meet the Prime Minister must be 10, 15 miles, at least 10, 15 miles. Every road was blocked by soldiers. Every road along the way was blocked by soldiers. So they don't seem to have any shortage of soldiers. In Afghanistan, I'm going to get onto the insurgency and everything in a moment. In the wintertime, many of the insurgents go back into Pakistan to rest for the winter before they go back for their spring campaign. And the Pakistan Army has about 80,000 troops in that area, up in the mountains in the tribal areas, but that's still not sufficient to keep the thing under control. Because anybody that knows Pakistan, these tribal areas, the central government's never been able to sort of discipline them. And people like Osama bin Laden, etc., are suspected to be living in these areas, in these tribes. And the tribes, of course, are the same people across the border, maybe basically Pashtun, who are on both sides of the border. And that's a real nub to the military problem right now, is that unless the border can be sealed, you've got this flow of insurgents all the time. In fact, you might note on the news today, there's an announcement that a Chinook helicopter went down and 10 U.S. soldiers were killed today. Well, they were involved in an operation involving a couple of thousand soldiers trying to block that border. And so today, you see that helicopter incident, the one in the north, or in Afghanistan, that's what they were trying to do, block the border. But the Prime Minister told us that so far they've had 600 soldiers killed trying to do this operation. Now, we don't hear about these things. We hear about our soldiers dying. We don't hear about other countries. But so far, they've suffered 600 deaths trying to keep that border closed. So they're trying to do their best for us, too. Now, when we get the news of Afghanistan, we get the impression it's just us or the Americans and the British. I think that's pretty well the only people mentioned. But there's 35 countries involved in Afghanistan. There's 35 countries that have contributed troops to Afghanistan. And at the moment in Afghanistan, if you divide Afghanistan in four parts, like a rectangle, the top half of the rectangle at the moment is under the control of NATO. And the bottom half of Afghanistan is under the control of the United States. The United States called their operation Enduring Freedom. And what's happening in the next few months is that NATO is moving into the south. NATO is going to take control of the areas in the south where we are. We moved from Kabul last year into Kandahar on the understanding that NATO would eventually take over. And we control one of the sectors there in the south. In the south, we control half of the south, and it's under a Canadian Commander, General Fraser. You may see him from time to time on television when we have these incidents. And he commands the troops in that sector, Sector 3. And in that sector, you've got the Canadians with about 1,000 troops. The Dutch are streaming in there now. They're coming in with 1,600 troops. And the British are also streaming in with 3,300 troops. They're coming in now. So we've been taking a lot of hits lately, the Canadians, because we were basically alone in there trying to keep things under control. And so when incidents occurred outside our normal zone, we'd rush out with some emergency forces to try and protect these sites, and that's where we've been taking casualties. But now the British and Dutch are moving in. I guess they're going to spread the pain around as we get more and more troops in there. Also working with us are the Romanians. You never hear about that, but the Romanians have a few companies of soldiers here with us in our zone. And we command that zone, I think, for another 4 or 5 months, and then we hand over to the Dutch, and there's a rotation. But so as the Dutch and the American and the British take over their areas, we will be able to concentrate on the province of Kandahar. That's our prime job, is the province of Kandahar, with the city of Kandahar. The only problem is Kandahar is bandit country. Kandahar is where the Taliban started, right in the schools and the mosques inside Kandahar. So we're like, I don't know what the equivalent is, we're in the baddest part of Afghanistan, and our job is to try and bring that under control. Now, people keep asking me why we're in Afghanistan, and there's 3 basic reasons why we're in Afghanistan, aside from the idea that the Liberals actually committed us to be there. But there's 3 reasons that we're there. One is it's in our national interest. You got to remember that in 2001, because Afghanistan collapsed as a state and the Taliban were running it, they had terrorist camps in Afghanistan where Al-Qaeda trained their people to launch attacks all over the world. And in 2001, an attack came in the United States against the Twin Towers and against Washington. But in those Twin Towers, 24 Canadians died. And from our country's point of view, and that's why we supported the previous government, is that when you come out and kill Canadians, we aren't going to let you go, we're going to go after you. And that's why we joined the United States and other countries to invade Afghanistan in early 2002, to overthrow the Taliban and to try to restore democracy and government in Afghanistan. So we're there in Afghanistan because of our security. And as I've told a number of people, If terrorists hadn't come out of Afghanistan to attack us, we wouldn't be there today. So it's a warning to other people, leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. But if you come after us, we're going after you. Another reason we're in Afghanistan is because we're one of the richest countries in the planet. And we have a responsibility for mankind too. We have a share of that responsibility, and we have to take leadership to try and deal with terrorism just like other countries do. So we're taking our share, and that's why we're taking leadership roles in Afghanistan. But the real reason we're in Afghanistan is because the Afghanis want us there. They want a stable life. They want to be able to look after their families. They want to have peace and quiet. They don't want bombs going off all over the place. They don't want the horrible, you just had your meal, I won't get into the details, but the horrible things that occurred under the Taliban, where they mutilated people and destroyed houses. They didn't let women anywhere. They didn't allow little girls to go to school. It was a really oppressive regime. And the Afghanis don't want that to return. And so we're contributing as part of 35 countries to try and sort of deal with that problem. Now, collectively, what we're trying to do is the military is there not to fight wars. The military, there is no ultimate military solution in Afghanistan. What the military is there for is to try to provide security, to try to keep the insurgents under control so that the governments can operate, so the courts can operate. And another thing we're trying to do is we're trying to build up the Afghan army and the Afghan police. The Afghan army, their final numbers are supposed to be about 70,000, 75,000. At the moment, they're about 29,000. And France and Britain and ourselves and a few other countries are training the Afghan army. We have a team in Kabul. We are basically handed over companies as they're formed and organized and basic trained, and we train companies on company operations. That's what we do in the piece of the pie. And so there's a bunch of countries trying to build up the Afghan army. And similarly, there's other countries trying to build the police up, and the police, they're supposed to get into the 60, 65,000 range, the police, the national police. And when we can get to a stage where the army is at a proper number and the police are a proper number and some proper training, then that's basically exit. Because if we can have governments operating there according to their style, and we can get enough law and order into the land, then you're going to start seeing us pull out, because we're not intending to stay there forever and ever. And that's what sort of the NATO countries are trying to do right now. Just to give you a reminder of what we've got committed, we have a task force based on a battalion of the PPC Allied, and there's some artillery in there, some armor, etc. But basically, it's based on a PPC Allied battalion out of Edmonton. We have a provincial reconstruction team in Kandahar. They're a small group of 50 to 60 military with some RCMP and some diplomats, etc., whose job is to try and help the local governor sort of with his governing, to sort of give him advice on how you govern and how you control things, and to train the police force. So we're trying to, the PRT in Kandahar itself is trying to build up that thing. We also have the regional headquarters. As I mentioned before, General Fraser is the military officer responsible for 1/4 of Afghanistan. The training team in Kabul I mentioned already. And we have a team there from international aid. Afghanistan has now become our #1 recipient of aid of all the countries in the world, so we've got 8 people there. And currently the troops are from the Edmonton Shiloh area. They will be rotating soon. Petawawa is going to be providing the next tranche of troops. So you're going to start hearing action and news and things about people from Petawawa soon. And beyond that, it's the 5 Brigade, the Bandus in Falcarchi, so there's sort of a rotation going on there. Now there's a couple of real problems that we're facing in Afghanistan, and we don't see a solution at the moment. The drug trade. The province Kandahar province, if Kandahar province is here, the next province over is called Helmand province, Helmand. And so forth, this is how they make money. And the local warlords and the local insurgents use the drug trade to finance their operations. And if we don't, I'm talking about the collective we, if the collective we do not solve this drug trade problem, we're not going to have stability in Afghanistan. Now, Canada itself is not directly involved in suppressing the drug trade. We've got our own responsibilities, but there's other countries within NATO that do, reinforcing the Afghanis. Which also reminds me, every operation you hear about where Canadians are involved, etc., the Afghanis are there too. The Afghan army's there, the Afghan police are there. And they're putting their lives on the line to try and bring order to their country. So it's very positive from that point of view. The other problem we're facing is a spillover from Iraq. Iraq is quite chaotic, at least the section of Iraq around Baghdad. It's not in the north. If you know your geography, you don't hear anything about the north. It's quiet. It's run by the Kurds and it's all quiet. And in the south of Iraq, you hear some problems, a few problems every once in a while with the Shiite Muslims, but not too many. Nearly all the problems are around Baghdad, the center, the Sunni Muslims. Well, a lot of their outsiders that go in there and train and disrupt are moving on to Afghanistan, sort of advise people in Afghanistan. So the insurgents in Afghanistan are getting more innovative in what they're doing. For instance, a few weeks ago when we had that tragedy where one of our G-Wagons was blown up with 4 of our soldiers, the explosion, to our knowledge, was not intended for the G-Wagon. It was intended for our armored personnel vehicles because I think the insurgents were testing to see how much explosive will take out one of these vehicles, because they used a huge explosive, and that's by people going later and seeing the cavity in the road. It probably would have taken out our LAV as well as the G-Wagon. It was just unfortunate when the explosion went off, who was in the way. But they're also getting involved now with radio-controlled explosives and all kinds of other little tricks they're running out of Iraq. So, that's sort of the downside of what we have to deal with. But overall, when you look at the situation in Afghanistan, things are getting better. As I said before, we have elections where we have governments now in all the 38 provinces and the capital. And in 2 of the provinces, we've literally handed over full control to the Afghanis. Their police and their army are controlling these provinces, so we don't have NATO forces there. And 3 or 4 million children are now going to school, including young girls. And the economy is growing at a phenomenal rate. It's like 25% per year. But you got to remember, they started very low. They were the 5th poorest country on the planet, so 25%, it's going fast, but it's coming along. So things are getting better there, but we still have a lot of challenges. So I think I'll just close off there. I'm just trying to give you an overview of what the situation is in Afghanistan, because you see it every day in the newspapers and on TV. So anyway, thank you very much for listening to me. Maybe if anybody has any questions or something, I'm open to questions if you have any.